Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Hello, very good evening. It is 1 minute past 8 on LBC. Welcome to Wednesday's Cross Question. On the panel with me, from right to left if you're watching us on Global Player, Jerry Hayes, barrister and former Conservative MP. Next to him is Baroness Olly Grender, Liberal Democrat peer. She's the party's Director of Communications. Next to her is James Heale, political correspondent for The Spectator. And to my left, Ajmal Masroor, Imam and broadcaster. And Ajmal, you should be stuffing your face tonight, shouldn't you? Given that it is Eid.
I shouldn't be here. Where's my food? It's Eid, right? That was my gift.
I'm afraid Global doesn't provide food, even to me, which is probably just as well. Now, we have lots of questions for you to answer. 0345 6060 973 if you'd like to add to them. You can text 84850 and you can say, Alexa, send a comment to LBC. And of course, I hope you're all watching us on Global Player.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Well, let's start off with a text question from Rebecca in Heale. Rishi Sunak said on LBC this morning that his plan is starting to work now. Do you see any evidence of this, Jerry Hayes?
Yes, I do. Inflation's gone down, but you're entitled to say, well, that's really the Bank of England. Things are going to get better, but are people actually listening? And this was a problem with the major government, was it? Just before the 1997 election, the economy was going well. Ken Clarke had got the economy going particularly well, but people had stopped listening. So the question is, well, the answer is, does it really matter?
If you look at his 5 pledges, yes, inflation has come down. There's very little evidence of any of the others working.
No, immigration. It's a problem. No one can solve immigration. If they say they are, they're not telling the truth.
Well, then what's the point of making the promise?
Because they're politicians.
You speak as if you weren't one for
well, I'm not one,
years.
so I can tell the truth, you see. Now, Olly's going to give us a wonderful spin on this, how Ed Davey, obviously, great man, supported the sub-postmasters in every way. And, of course, you know, he was misled by the civil servants.
Oh, well, you are leading her off on a very different path there. I think I'll chair this debate.
All right, sorry about that.
Do you see any evidence of Rishi Sunak's plan working in any way? I mean, put back your political commentator hat on rather than necessarily
Director of
Comms. Yes.
Yeah. So even as a political commentator, I have always been addicted to knocking on doors on a regular basis. You'd find that astonishing, knowing me as you do, Jerry and Iain in particular. I'm not finding that. I genuinely am not finding that on the doorsteps. It's not being borne through in any of the polls. And people raise on a very regular basis particular issues, of which I think the biggest issue is wanting to change this government. I mean, I know that you had some commentary about Rishi Sunak looking a bit tired in terms of his interview with Nick Ferrari this morning. Well, the whole nation is tired of this government and wanting change. I mean, that's the imperative that comes through loud and clear from everyone on every doorstep. And then the access to healthcare is the absolute biggie. And it's about things like, you know, kind of dentist waiting lists. It's things like getting to see a GP. And it just feels like it's pretty acute. I was knocking on doors on Sunday. I won't say where.
On Sunday?
Yeah.
Have you not got a life? Have you not got a life, Olly?
And they don't like it.
Do you know, people are very chatty and I love it. Sorry, kill me now, but I do love chatting to people on doorsteps.
Like it.
And people have a lot to say, but a lot of it is, you know, I'm afraid that they want a change and they're pretty unhappy, especially on the health service.
I mean, we may have a question on this later, but I haven't seen one yet, so I'm going to ask it now. Why don't they want to change to you, though? Because the votes are going to either Labour or Reform at the moment, and to a certain extent the Greens, but your poll ratings are still languishing in, 8, 9, 10%? So
under a first-past-the-post system, ask me what we want to achieve here and what we need to achieve. And yeah, we're in a, you know, kind of we're in a position where we have very few MPs. What we need to achieve is more MPs so that you think that we are more significant, like we need to overtake the SNP, for instance, in terms of their number of MPs. Now, look, we had 3 million more votes in the last general election than the SNP. but take a look at how many MPs they have versus how many we have. And so seats are critical. So and Iain, you're always so good at this at general elections when you write your little summary of every seat and which ones you think are going to change hands. and you know that it's not about that national layer at the top.
I do.
It is about those individual seats.
You talk a good game, but when you've got reform on 15%...
Well, I would hope so.
Well, indeed. You've got reform on 15% now.
Yeah.
And you're nowhere near that.
We have 3,000 councillors. Reform have how many last time I checked? Guess.
No,
Anyone know?
It's
Anyone
six.
know the answer?
It's 6.
Don't care.
9.
Who is reform?
9.
Don't care.
But that's councillors.
Yeah, who cares?
Yeah, but it's, kind of, councillors are the baseline, the bedrock. They are people making critical day-to-day decisions. You've got to have a decent number of councillors if you're serious about the country. You've got to. You know that.
So obviously, in the general election, it's quite clear that you're targeting the so-called blue wall, sort of marginal or relatively safe Conservative seats in the south and southwest.
Well, and lovely parts of the country, such as, I would encourage everyone who wants to knock on doors, who's listening, on behalf of the party, to wander up to lovely places like Cheadle, Hazel Grove, Harrogate. So it's not just the southeast.
Well, those are all seats that have had Lib Dem MPs in the past, aren't they?
Yeah.
But you are casting your net a little bit more widely in the south.
Yeah.
I mean, do you have a target number of seats that you want to achieve, apart from 650?
So what you never do is assign a specific number. What I can tell you is that we are second to the Conservatives in 80 seats in the last general election, and that there is a smaller number of those that we intend to get over the line. And it is mostly Conservative facing that are the battlegrounds that we're fighting. But what I would never do is give a number to anyone.
Sounds like a Lib Dem poll to me. We've never had them before.
Winning
Jerry.
here. Winning here. Right, Ajmal Masroor, you don't have a dog in this fight, as the saying goes. But going back to the question about Rishi Sunak, do you see any evidence, and do people talk to you about whether things are starting to get better or whether they might do before the election?
What plan? Rishi Sunak didn't have a plan.
Well, he says he does.
Well, that's anyone can claim that. He's the unelected Prime Minister we have. He
was elected by the Conservative Party to be leader. We have a parliamentary democracy.
I know. He's the leftover from the rejects from the previous lot. But it's the truth is, he's not even popular within the Conservative Party. Why would he be popular amongst the masses? So when I speak to my congregation, in my mosque and in my local area and wherever I go, cost of living is a major concern. It's absolutely a dire state for many. In our mosque food bank, our number has gone up from 70 to 150 families being served food every week. 70 to 80% of them happen to come from all other faith, and obviously a smaller number from the Muslim faith, but it doesn't matter. It is a dire state. People are talking about mortgages. They can't pay their mortgages. In fact, my mortgage has gone leveled up to a point where I think it's going to be impossible for me to pay. Cost of living for students. It's just astronomical. My daughter is getting ready to go to university. We're doing the maths and we're thinking we can't afford it unless she takes loans. And Islamically speaking, from a faith perspective, it's unethical for me to take loans based on interest. I'm looking for every other ways to survive. On top of everything else, we are quite happy to cause international havoc, supply weapons to countries of all unsavory nature, but we are seeing a country that is on its knees. Our health service, our education program, our schools, our NHS, all crumbling right in front of us. And Rishi Sunak is talking about plan when actually there is no plan. And I'm afraid not only do the country want to see a change, everybody is desperate for a change. And Tory party is not going to be the change. And I don't think Labour Party is offering me an alternative either. I used to be quite soft with the Lib Dems, but I have left them when they went to bed with the Tories under Nick Clegg. And I think that was their biggest mistake. When you go to bed with the enemy, you would get bitten and then you get thrown out and rejected. Nobody wants you. That's the unfortunate reality. Do I support
nearly
reform?
10 years ago.
Yeah, well, people don't forget. I haven't forgotten.
Yeah.
I don't forget. I'm sorry.
Well, I'm sure you don't, but I mean, really. Yeah. What's the answer?
So I'm coming to it. Not reform.
Really? I know. I grew a beard. It's gone white.
It has, of course. Mine is not very far away. Reform is not the answer. Reform is...
Okay, so where do we go then?
Independent. Let's make independent candidates win this election, because then they will actually yield power.
No,
they will have to negotiate with independent people, or a coalition government, like we see in many European countries. The two-party system that we have...
You just slagged off a coalition government. Now you want one.
No, I slagged off... what's his name again? I've forgotten his name already.
Nick
Clegg. For a genuine reason, he broke many of his promises that he made.
He also got 70... I mean, far be it from me to say this, but he got 75% of his manifesto implemented in those 5 years.
Well,
what's not to like from your point of view?
He introduced free school meals. He raised the tax threshold, taking millions out of taxation altogether.
Which is fine. But electorally, you have not translated that into votes for the last, I don't know how many elections. And that in itself is an indicator of a Liberal failure.
But you're part of the problem. You're a political tart.
Why?
Because you go from party to party and then you do one thing that you might not agree with, so you think, I'll go to a different party next time.
Isn't that what the electoral are all about? You have to come and sell your horses to me. And if I don't like it, I'll buy someone else's. At the moment, none of them are selling it. They're all part of the same... two sides of the back, two
cheeks of the same arse. That's what you mean.
That's what George
Galloway. Oh dear,
that's what he said. But it's unfortunately the truth. That's unfortunately the rotten example of politics today. You ask my daughter, young teenager, growing up, 18 now. She says, politicians, I hate them, detest them. A generation of young people are growing up detesting, hating politics and politicians. We have failed, Iain. Our parties have failed. And we're sitting here thinking if Rishi Sunak is going to be able to rescue our country, our economy, in the next election, no way. I can't see it.
James Heale, now you work at The Spectator, sort of normally very staunchly Tory. What are people saying in your office?
Well, I think we appreciate the scale of the challenge facing Rishi Sunak right now. And I think, to echo Jerry's point, if you look at the polls, since last May in the local elections, a lot of pollsters are saying there's sort of news avoidance in terms of focus groups. People have just tuned out and are not listening and are simply, they've made their judgment, they're waiting to cast their vote. And so until we get to the kind of short campaign the election's called, we're not going to see much in the kind of way of voters taking notice of what the politicians are saying. I think Rishi Sunak's had a very difficult inheritance. I think the 2020s thus far are shaping up to be potentially our most challenging decade since the 1970s. I think that would test any politician right now. And I think coming after 14 years or so, Rishi Sunak's probably going to be judged on his party and their defects rather than necessarily him and his own strengths. So I think that, where we are right now, I think Rishi Sunak as well is not going to be able to do what Boris Johnson did in 2019, which was pulling off the trick of reinventing himself as a different type of conservative, someone to sort of break up the system, etc. And so I think that, the key thing is going to be whether they can turn that kind of 25 points in the polls to 30 points and try and make it a bad result rather than an absolute wipeout. So I think everyone would accept, we can see where the polls is going. It's going to be a very, very difficult campaign for the Conservatives.
Is there any light on the horizon for Rishi Sunak?
Well, we've had two fiscal events in the last 6 months or so, and neither the budget nor the autumn statement, which had, I think, 30 billion of tax cuts, really made any difference to it. So I'm struggling to see what's going to come over the horizon. I chatted into one figure in government last week, and they were pointing out we might have industrial action in the coming weeks and months with, I think, the National Education Union suggested there's going to be a strike in teachers. So I think that's only going to add to that backlog in terms of the public services. And that's one of the things you see in focus groups is that people repeatedly complain they can't get proper educational schools, etc. And I think that's what's really going to harm the Tories because I don't see in the short term what they can really turn it around this year with.
Well, we've got lots more to discuss. If you'd like to put a question to our panel, the number 0345 6060 973. You're watching or listening to LBC. It is 8:15.
LBC Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
It's 18 minutes past 8 on LBC. With us in the studio, Lib Dem peer Olly, Grender, Ajmal, Masroor, Imam and broadcaster James Heale from The Spectator, and Jerry Hayes, barrister and former Conservative MP. Jamie in York has texted this: do we need a referendum on leaving the European Convention on Human Rights? Now, Rishi Sunak told Nick Ferrari this morning he's prepared to do whatever it takes to make the Rwanda policy a reality, after Nick asked if he's prepared to withdraw the UK from the ECHR. But the Times reports today that as many as 12 cabinet ministers would oppose leaving it, including the Home Secretary and the Chancellor. James Heale, let's come to you first on this.
Not right now, but I can see one happening in 20 years. 1997, 200 Tories break the party policy in that election to campaign against Britain joining the euro. Among them, one young MP candidate named as David Cameron. 20 years later, leaving the European Union is Tory party policy at the 2017 election. 20 years from now, I can see the ECHR officially leaving that as part of the Tory party policy, particularly given the case this week in which Swiss pensioners were able to argue that climate change, Switzerland wasn't taking enough action to address climate change and it was damaging their health. But right now, with a dozen cabinet members against this, I can't see this happening because the Tories are so split on it. But I do think if the court carries on with cases like this week, it's going to be an issue for the next 10 and 20 years in British politics.
But what's wrong with what they said? They just said countries have a duty to protect people against climate change. What's wrong with that?
Well, the danger is that you then set a precedent which is then enacted into laws because you then have a court deciding what policy should effectively be and striking down policies.
Because that's what most people say who don't, with great respect, James, who don't understand what the EHSR, the European Court of Human Rights, says. We only have to take note. We don't have to do it. Do you remember prisoners' votes? What happened to that? Well, nothing. We ignored it. We can ignore this as well.
Well, if you look at
what's the point of being a member of a court which you can ignore?
Well, that is a very good question.
I thought so.
And I will just sort of,
maybe put it to my learned friend.
Flounder a little bit. No. Well, I think of an answer. The fact is, it actually puts the feet to the fire of those bad people who were abusing human rights. It was Churchill who was founder of this. It was written by the people. It was Maxwell Fyfe, I think.
Was, yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
Maxwell Fyfe, who
he was Home Secretary, James, in the
1950s. And he was a prosecutor. Oh, no, he knows this stuff. He was a prosecutor at Nuremberg. It is a force for good. The real problem, and this is what we've got to deal with, I think it is Rule 31, where they've given themselves a power, which I don't think they have, on the Rwanda thing, to suddenly say, right, we will decide to do this without any listening to anybody else. They don't have the power to do that, and there can be negotiations on it.
The other thing,
they could have the power to stop flights, couldn't they?
Well, they say they have. I'm not sure they have. I think it's Rule 31. It's not an article, interestingly. It's a rule.
The other reason why I think, other than the cabinet being split on this, it's not going to become more is because today is the 26th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement. And of course, written into that is the ECHR membership. And a Conservative government that was elected in 2019 on getting Brexit done, do they really want to go into this election saying it's not yet done, actually? We're going to have to spend the next 5-10 years talking about the Good Friday Agreement.
So you don't think it would be in a Tory manifesto?
I'm sceptical. I can see an argument where it will be, they'll do it in the next Parliament. But I'm sceptical about doing anything this side of it, which was going to particularly cause a lot of legislation, ripping all that kind of stuff. But I tend towards the scepticism side of this. And even people within government, I think, who would like to leave the ECHR think it's one for the future, not one for right now.
Yeah.
Ajmal.
What's wrong with staying with them? I have not yet seen a conclusive or convincing argument to suggest that we should leave. If it's an advisory role, this particular organisation plays, they've done quite a lot of things. Freedom of expression for the media has been one of the greatest achievements of European, everyone forgets the acronym. What is it? ECHR. And that in itself shows that we do have a huge, they have a role to play. Looking at what we are doing, what we're saying, it's an advisory role. They can't impose it. It's up to our parliament what they enact. So I don't understand what's the big deal. I think it's just a distraction for us from focusing on Tory failures over the last so many years to this particular issue, similar to the issue of immigration that cannot ever be solved, constant destruction from the focus, that economic failure by the Tories, the country is in ruins, we're on our knees, health service destroyed almost, privatised through the back doors, education services. Name me one thing that has succeeded under this particular government. And these are the destructions that I find quite pathetic, to be honest.
But Ian, what I don't understand is what is the difference in policy on the health service and the economy from Labour?
You're going off on a tangent again, and I don't want to do that.
No, okay.
We haven't heard from Olly yet.
Sorry, Olly.
Well, so this feels like some kind of dog whistle debate that kind of comes around in this never-ending cycle.
Yeah.
And as Jerry said, kind of there was never any constraint by it in the way it was described originally in the first place by the European Court of Human Rights, and it still remains the case that there isn't that level of constraint. So it's a bit like when Liz Truss goes off on one of her numbers about the deep state is taking over. It's one of those kind of debates where it's used as kind of the for want of a better description, the bogeyman of the moment. But actually, kind of then everyone gets very, kind of aerated, says they're going to absolutely pull us from it. And it doesn't happen. All the time it's one of those, it's just, kind of this never-ending circle of, kind of tokenistic debate rather than serious work. And it's a bit like the declaring Rwanda as a safe place through legislation. It's got that similar kind of feel to it of, kind of asserting a position, asserting some kind of, position about this issue whilst we're going to, send 200 people there? That's all they've got room for.
Oh,
and so,
Olly, we did send someone over. We sent Boris Johnson over and he came back.
So we then end up having a massive debate about somewhere like Rwanda when the only impact is 200 people. And it's just, it's kind of signposting, but it's not real change.
And the thing is,
and it's not the real change that people are looking for.
There has never been a court in the history of humankind where the politicians haven't had an issue with at some point, or even the people haven't had an issue with. But you don't, just because the Supreme Court ruled against Boris Johnson on proroguing Parliament, I don't remember anybody saying, we must abolish the Supreme Court then.
Well, a few of the tabloids said that, these people were elite and didn't have a right to
they called the enemy of the people, I think they were, weren't they? But, and fine, I think you should be able to criticise courts. I mean, there are countries in the world where if you even utter the most moderate criticism of a judge or a court, you can be had up before the judge. In fact, I was nearly one of them in Northern Ireland, but that is another story. Oh, your ears are perked up, haven't they, Jerry?
Yes.
I was nearly
My fees are very good.
I was nearly in the Maze prison with Peter Hain. You should listen to the podcast that I did with him.
Being in a cell with Peter Hain, oh dear.
Isn't that the last resort for individuals when the state could actually do anything it wants? As an individual, I need to find some solace somewhere. And this particular organisation provides that last resort in case of my human rights. And I think it's a fantastic thing to have, some checks and balances, even if it's advisory. Otherwise, a government, a state could do anything they want. Of course they can, but this one makes a lot of noise.
Well, I think the argument is that, if opponents of the ECHR were here, they would probably say, well, that's the job of the British courts. That's the job of the Supreme Court. There's nothing actually that the ECHR does to protect your rights that the Supreme Court can't do.
Wouldn't it also breach Good Friday Agreement?
Yes.
Well, I can't answer that. But
No, it would, and that's a big problem.
The answer is yes.
I'm not advocating withdrawing from it. I'm just
I'm
saying
not saying
that's what people
I'm arguing,
would
saying
argue.
that we shouldn't, and the idea that we should have a referendum in itself flies on the face of the entire argument. If it's going to be impacting Good Friday Agreement, my God, what are we talking about?
What did Margaret Thatcher say about referenda? The last refuge or something like this, of despots, because she lived through Hitler's Germany. He did everything through referenda.
And we have Brexit as an example, which we have seen through referendum.
No, that was Democrat. I was against
There
it.
you
It's
go.
democratically elected.
No, by referendum as the outcome. Look at this.
No,
A few
but you
people
had two
withdrew.
elections
Just because you
after
don't
that.
like the outcome, that doesn't mean to say
I
that.
didn't say the democratic process was wrong. I'm saying how a democratic process could be completely skewed in one direction because of the vigour and the rigour of a campaign. It doesn't necessarily mean you've come
had
up with
two
the right
elections
answer.
That's
afterwards.
ridiculous.
Two
Well,
elections.
you may not
That
be
is
able
This is
to-
a
mad.
ridiculous argument.
Quite
But
mad.
would you be able to come up with a conclusive argument to suggest that that was the right one? For example, leaving the
Well,
That's
European
not the
Union.
I
point.
believe
It's a
that
democratic one.
It was a
But
democratic one.
maybe,
and
but it's
believe-
the right one.
Well, it's
No,
not the
you don't
point.
think it was the right one, but we aren't governed by the laws of Ajmal Masroor.
No.
I'm not suggesting we should. I'm saying you also don't think it's the right one.
What? No.
Brexit.
Yes, I do think it was the right decision.
Okay,
I
fair enough.
voted for it and I stand by it.
So I'm suggesting that referendum per se doesn't necessarily solve our problem, and suggesting
agree
that we
with
should,
that.
to suggest that we should have a referendum for this particular ECHR exit or whatever you want to call it. I think it's not going
But
to be.
there are many countries in the world that do have referendums the whole time. I mean,
Switzerland.
virtually every year.
Well,
New Zealand, Switzerland, the United States, lots of states
It was
in the
Switzerland
United
that
States.
banned minarets based on referendum because a right-wing campaign was led for a particular canton that decided to ban a minaret. What's a minaret got to do with anything? They banned it. And this is how crazy a referendum could be. I'm not saying referendum per se are bad, but it could be. And if we're not careful, what did you say about Mrs. Thatcher?
She didn't like them because she saw the rise of Hitler using referenda. But we had two. I was against Brexit. I was a Remainer. At the end of the day, after the referendum, we had two elections. Democracy got it right.
I have to say, I think that most of the political class are pretty bruised still by 2016, and I'm not sure many want to go back to
But
a
even
referendum.
Michael Gove, I was listening
Yeah.
to him on a podcast
Yeah,
this
yeah.
week, basically saying never ever have a referendum
No,
ever
absolutely.
again.
Leave it alone.
What happened to him?
Well, you may well ask.
And in terms of public support, I mean, the ECHR membership, there's a poll in the Telegraph today, 52% support remaining a member of the ECHR, 27% I think want to leave it. My point was, maybe 20 years' time that changes, a bit like Brexit. You know, how many people supported leaving the EU in the 1990s? But right now, I don't think it has the potency that, say, Brexit did in 2019.
Well, do stay tuned because we have a nice calming question next on arms sales to Israel. It's
thank
half
heavens
past
for that.
8. Josh Bancroft has the news headlines.
The Prime Minister has told LBC the legal advice on arms sales to Israel is unchanged and they're obligated to follow it. Rishi Sunak has said aid needs to be increased into Gaza and the conflict is becoming increasingly intolerable. A judge says a man who attacked his 4-week-old baby showed callous indifference by not calling for help. 29-year-old Michael Davis has been jailed for at least 22 years for murdering his son Olly in Leicester in 2017. And Joe Biden has said the US are considering dropping charges against Julian Assange. The WikiLeaks founder is accused of sharing sensitive information about the Afghanistan and Iraq wars. LBC weather, rain easing in the west and far northeast overnight. The odd light shower elsewhere, a low of 7.
This is LBC. Leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale. Tweet at LBC.
As someone says on a text here, a feisty one it is tonight. Right, we have Olly Grender with us in the studio, Lib Dem peer, Director of Communications for the Liberal Democrats, Ajmal Masroor, Imam and broadcaster, James Heale, Political Correspondent for The Spectator and former Conservative MP, and now a barrister, Jerry Hayes. Now, a call from Adie in Hammersmith. Adie, hi.
Hi, how you doing, Ian?
Good, thank you. What would you like to ask?
Well, I'd like to ask the panel why, in a democracy, we're still selling arms to Israel despite 10,000 children having been killed.
Who should we go to first on that? Ajmal.
Oh, good Lord. Very simple, really. Do you remember Rwanda genocide? It's actually the 30-year... Yesterday was the 30th year, and we saw 800,000 people killed because we stood by and silently watched it happen. And there was no political will on the part of the politicians globally to do anything, despite the mounting evidence that was presented to Bill Clinton. Later on, who came and gave a mealy-mouth apology, saying he didn't really understand the gravity of what was going on.
Well, to be fair to him, he has said it's one of his biggest regrets.
I understand. But to 800,000...
It's the French who we have to blame for it, mainly.
And even Macron has recently acknowledged that. So 800,000 people's lives killed. We've not learned, it's been our mantra before. Israel has repeatedly violated international laws, showed no regard for the rights of the civilians in Gaza or in Palestinian territories, including West Bank. It has gone with mission to rescue the hostages and has failed. It has gone with the mission to kill Hamas or destroy Hamas. It has failed.
It's killed thousands of Hamas fighters.
I know, but has not got rid of the concept called Hamas. The Arabic word Hamas actually means...
But that was never going to happen.
Of course. The Arabic word Hamas means resistance. And this is an occupied people. They have a right to resist under international law. Hamas has been an organization that has led their resistance. So to take away their right to resist is to take away Palestinian people's right to exist.
That's just jumping on semantics, isn't it, frankly? It's actually quite insulting to the 1,200 people that they killed on October 7th.
I was about to say not 1,200. It's more than that. 1,200 on the Israeli side, but nearly 40,000 Palestinians, majority of whom are innocent children and women.
And none of those would have been killed had October the 7th never happened.
But it does not justify
I'm not
mass
saying
murder.
It does, I'm just pointing out a fact.
I know, but it doesn't justify. International law doesn't justify. Israel is an occupying force. It doesn't have the right to do what it has done. It has right to go...
Well, it wasn't an occupying force, was it? Because it withdrew in 2005.
No, it's according to our law. It says Gaza is an occupied territory. It's British law, and we can't deny that. And therefore, we have to go by what our law says. So if Israel is an occupying force, and we have supplied it weapons, which it has used against civilians. Even our aid workers recently, who've been killed, 7 of them, international aid workers. Unfortunately, it's taken a few European deaths for us to wake up to realize what Israel is doing actually isn't working.
Well, again, I think that you're completely distorting the facts there, because David Cameron, as Foreign Secretary, over the past month or two, has spoken out quite strongly against what the Israelis have been doing in many ways, and actually overtly criticised them for not allowing aid through.
But in the meantime...
So you can't just sit there and say that Britain has been an unquestioning ally of
I didn't
Israel.
say that. It was not my
that's what you're implying.
No, my words are not those. I was saying, even if you are a critical ally or criticizing ally, we are witnessing a famine right now. We're witnessing closure of an entire population being starved to death. The number of... Every day, Ian, in my mosque, people are coming with thousands of pounds of money so that we can send it to an organization that could provide food and medicine to the besieged people every day. And I, as an Imam, I don't know who to give the money to, because I'm saying I can't solve this problem. Your money is not going to solve the problem. It's international communities that need to come together and say to Israel, stop this. It's not going to go anywhere. We would like to see Palestinians, Israelis, Jews, Christians, Muslims, people of faith and no faith live together in harmony and peace. This is not going to bring peace in the region. It's going to escalate and it's going to make it worse. Do you think those thousands of people killed on both sides are going to forget one another and not want to take revenge? What's looking like, and it's been stated by many, that Israel has gone on a killing spree. And unfortunately, that's not acceptable. If Hamas, as a terrorist organization, went on a killing spree, and
which they did.
And we condemn it wholeheartedly to say that's barbaric, that's brutal. Israel is doing the same thing, and they're doing it in higher scale.
They're
precision.
not cutting the
I would
babies
quite
out
like
of
to-
them.
But that's not true.
No, hang on.
That is
hang
not
on,
proven to be true.
hang on.
It's been
Oh, come on. That's
What
rubbish.
isn't?
the
That's all
baby
rubbish.
baby
Oh, no,
story.
it's proven to be. I've seen the pictures.
We've seen the pictures. We've seen the videos.
Show us the video. Show me
It's
a
there.
got
It's
it
on
here
the
to
internet
tell
if
you.
you want to see
Anyway,
it.
listen.
Don't delude yourself.
The point
Okay.
I'm making is Israel has the right to defend itself at what expense? Do you completely destroy people of Gaza, 40,000 people killed, 80% of Gaza destroyed, more than 2.3 million displaced? Is that the outcome of a precision attack? It isn't. It's mass murder.
Okay, Olly Grender.
So I'd quite like to answer Adie's question, which is I don't think that arms should be sold from here to Israel. I mean, I think it's quite a kind of strong signal, but also I think we should get the legal advice that the government currently isn't publishing. Now, it may be that there's some sensitive information in there, in which case let's see it redacted at the very least. But definitely, and I mean, in the UK, actually, in terms of arms sold to Israel, it's quite a small amount from the UK.
95 million a year.
But it is quite significant in the US, and I think this would be a strong signal from a UK democracy. Though I completely agree with what both Iain and Jerry are saying about we have to bear in mind exactly what happened on the 7th of October, but at the same time, the kind of humanitarian crisis that is now taking place in Gaza, the very fact or thought that there were UK-sold weapons that were being used and deployed to in the attack on the 7 aid workers, for instance, that's quite a difficult concept, isn't it? So I think we should see whatever the legal advice is on whether we are actually going against international law now by selling these arms.
Jerry.
Do you know, I'm sorry to go off on a bit of a tangent on this.
It has been known.
It has been known. Look, I
You
support...
do this in court?
Yes. I support... Of course I do. I support... But you're better than the judges who are sort of questioning me. So I'm glad you're not a judge. So, look...
Oh, imagine that.
Oh, yeah, no.
Judge Iain.
Give
Rob Rinder a run for his money.
Oh, yeah, he could easily do that. I led him on a murder years ago, actually.
He listens to this programme, so don't say
Oh,
anything
no, I
illegal.
love you. I love him to bits. Right, but what I find so depressing is, right, I support the right of Israel to exist. Hamas doesn't. Hamas wants to destroy the state of Israel. Iran wants to destroy the state of Israel. We were very close to a deal with Saudi Arabia on Israel, and I suspect this is what happened on the October the 7th stuff. It doesn't help anybody, but I think that is the reality of what is happening in the Middle East. So what do we do about it? What we're trying to do, David Cameron, Joe Biden is saying, I'm sorry, Netanyahu, and Netanyahu is a bad man. He really is a bad man. He is actually being propped up from not going to prison by the right-wing extremists, the religious extremists. Yeah. But again, how does that solve any problem? But what's happening, Ajmal, in this country? For years, people have had to have guards outside Jewish schools. For years, people have to have guards outside synagogues. Look at the abuse that Jews are getting on the streets. Nothing to do with the state of Israel. There is the worst anti-Semitism I've ever seen in this country. Do you agree?
Yes, I get it every day.
And what are we going to do about it?
I get it every day as a Muslim. Hold on. I get it every day as a Muslim, right? Just one second, Ian. The sympathy that we have for each other is we're united on this, and that is anti-Semitism and Islamophobia are both awful, cancerous sickness in our society. Yes. We need to fight it together. Let's separate that for 1 minute. The Palestinian crisis did not begin on the 7th of October. It's been going on for 75 years. Occupation, illegal settlement, violation of international
We're not going into the whole history of it.
We are. We
have not got time. We're not going to do it because we want to hear from James.
Of course.
Yeah, to go back to the question, I just say the reason why the UK isn't imposing an arms embargo is because the stated policy of the government is they want to support Israel's right to self-defence, and that was the thing that Oliver Dowden, the Deputy Prime Minister, said first thing on Sunday morning in response to the reports by David Cameron. I think in terms of the figure cited, it's about the UK arms, it's about 0.02% of Israel's use of arms. So I think that the figure involved is not huge, which may be perhaps one of the reasons why.
I think they sell more to us than we sell to them, actually.
How many babies has that killed?
Oh, come on.
You see, if you're going to reduce it to that level.
Really?
No, but they're human beings here.
Well, that's an argument for abolishing all arms sales
I agree
throughout
with
the
that.
whole world.
I agree with
I
that.
don't,
No,
because
that's
I believe
daft.
that a country has a right to defend itself.
Why is that daft?
No,
we sell
again,
arms to Saudi Arabia, right?
you're diverting us on another tangent, which we're not going to go down because we haven't finished hearing from James.
So which is why perhaps one of the theories being suggested why the legal advice hasn't been has not suggested that the UK is facilitating Israeli breaches of international law, is that maybe those weapons we're selling are so small to actually not be involved in any of those kind of controversial incidents. But I think the key thing is what Rishi Sunak said today on LBC, which is when he said, we're acting with our allies on all of this. And I think that until we see a kind of sea change that we saw at the end of last year in terms of calling for a ceasefire, etc., we're not going to see the UK differing from the position of other countries like the USA, Australia, for instance. What I would say is about the interest in terms of the government is that there's different members who put different emphasis on things. So, for instance, David Cameron said on Sunday about his grave concerns, while Oliver Dowden's starting point was about Israel's right to self-defence. So I think that's kind of the interesting tension within the party. But I do think it's striking that the government is mostly focusing on things like aid rather than arms embargoes.
Can I just remind anyone that wants to send abusive messages via WhatsApp into the programme, particularly when they're of an anti-Semitic nature, that we have your phone number, and I won't hesitate to pass that number on to the Metropolitan Police if you persist. And I'm talking to you, Ben. It's 8:44.
LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
8:45 on LBC. Another uncontroversial question coming to our panel. Olly, Grender, Ajmal, Masroor, James Heale and Jerry Hayes. It's an email question from Zoe, who says, does the panel agree that the Cass review provides a serious wake-up call to all political parties and the NHS about how ideological capture can happen if whistleblowers are ignored and debate is chilled through name-calling? Does the panel welcome the findings and agree healthcare should be evidence-based and not ideologically driven? Well, this, of course, refers to the Hilary Cass review, which was published today, all about particularly child-related transgender issues, the use of puberty blockers, etc., etc. We talked about it in the last hour on the programme. Olly, Grender, your party has got a very clear policy on trans issues, which has not been uncontroversial within the Liberal Democrats. What's the Liberal Democrat reaction to the Cass review? Because West Streeting for Labour has welcomed it, the government's welcomed it. What about you?
Yeah, it's broadly good. I mean, there are a lot of recommendations in there, so it's going to take a while to work through and understand. I think the really important pieces that I've picked out is the need for the talking therapies and talking therapies quickly, and how I think it's put at around 5,000 children are currently on a waiting list for this, and that seems really significant. And it's almost like, kind of that whole approach, which is included in the Cass report about a holistic approach to a child, is exactly the right thing to a child, to the child's family, but also, allowing medical expertise. And so in that sense, that is all broadly welcome.
Okay, Jerry?
Alex Carlile and I led the battle for trans rights.
Yes, I remember.
Years and years.
Former Lib Dem
and
MP
years
and
former-
barrister.
yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And he's in the House of Lords
Yeah.
with
Yeah,
you.
he championed it a long time before.
But-
it was this kind of level of debate, yeah.
But the debate has gone absolutely mad. We are dealing effectively with child abuse. They are children who are given beta blockers without the opportunity
Puberty
of...
blockers.
I'm sorry,
I think they're somewhat
I've been on
different.
beta blockers. Terrible, I'm sorry about that. Puberty blockers. That is child abuse. It's wrong. It really is. And surgery, which is a mutilation. Now, I know a number of people who felt, and we've all interviewed people from the age of 5 who felt uncomfortable, really uncomfortable in their bodies. And we must give them all the help that we possibly can. But Cass Report is absolutely right. It has gone mad. There are gender clinics who are taking advantage of young people. We must help those people who are genuinely in need of counselling, and they've got to think about what they do. And it's not been happening. And I wholly support this thing. And I agree with trans rights. But again, what about the protection of women? Let's move it one little bit further. I don't care how people self-identify. I really don't. But if you've got male genitalia, I generally don't believe you should be in a woman's place. You shouldn't be in a woman's toilet. You shouldn't be in a woman's changing room. You shouldn't be in a woman's prison.
You'll be called a TERF for saying that.
A TERF?
Yes.
I'd be a TERF accountant.
A trans exclusionary...
Radical feminist.
That's the one. Thank you for rescuing me there.
Well, maybe I am. I'm just trying to talk basic common sense, but I think the majority of the British people believe in. Although I very much doubt. Well, never mind.
Patrick says, I've never watched Cross Question until tonight live, but if any of my teachers just gave me the glare that I just saw from Iain Dale to Ben, I'd have been a much better behaved student.
Quite right.
Put us in our place. I think what's so striking from this report is almost how the NHS has been overwhelmed by this kind of explosion over the past 10, 15 years or so. There was one striking statistic, which I think the number of people being referred from the Tavistock Clinic in 2011 was 250. Yep. 2021, it was 5,000. So that's a factor, a fold of 20. And I think that it's not just the UK wrestling with this, it's going to be other Western nations as well. And I think what's quite dangerous is how much has changed in that time. And so there was one line in the report where Hilary Cass talks about how people were changing puberty blockers in terms of clinical trials without seeing the full evidence of how that would affect out in the long term. And of course, what we're dealing with here is not a sort of, a broken leg or something short. This is about someone transitioning and maybe 5-10 years down the line, how they feel as a result of that. And so I think what's the reaction to Hilary Cass, I think, speaks volumes. 388-page report, 4 years of her life involved in this. And even those kind of campaigners on both sides today have been taken back and sort of welcomed the call for more evidence, even if they've been very strident on this in the past few years and said, the debate settled one way or another. So I think that Hilary Cass has done the near impossible here. She's taken a lot of the heat out of the issue and has produced a report that is evidence-based and welcomed by all sides.
Ajmal?
I'm surprised that I agree a lot with what Jerry had to say. I know you are falling off your checklist.
I need therapy.
I think you do. I'm a counsellor. I'll see you afterwards.
For so many other reasons too.
Just stop it.
I do get a number of people coming to the mosque and as you know, I also do relationship therapy.
Do you? No, I didn't know that.
Oh, okay, yes. I've been doing it for 20 years. I've written 2 books on marriage. From an Islamic perspective, but universally, it's very similar values. It's very similar human aspirations and dreams and desires. So I actually am very afraid of shutting out. And your original question, Iain, was about whistleblowers. I think it's a very good thing we have. We need whistleblowers. We need to protect them. We need to have sufficient checks and balances to make sure that people do have rights to whistleblow and go by their conscience, especially if it's based on evidence. And so I think that's the first thing. So the answer to your question is we must protect it, and it's a good thing. Secondly, to do with the gender issue that you've just raised, it's very alarming. If my child is 15, if he came to me and he said, I'm not comfortable with my gender, and then he wanted puberty blockers and have operations, I would be extremely worried. What if 5 years down the line he changes his mind? he has destroyed any prospect
But
of.
wouldn't you be worried? I mean, if he was, isn't 15 almost irrelevant here? Wouldn't you be worried if he was 18 or 25?
I would be
or 30?
at any age, but I'm relating to my own son because he's 15. I
Sure.
see him at home. He changes his mind every day on many things in life. One day he wants to be a barrister. Next day he wants to be a teacher.
He's got that from you. You keep changing your mind about how you're voting.
No, I'm not.
Yes, but that's
Yes, you
precisely why
And-
talking therapies is so critically important. And that's precisely why the crisis currently is that there is such a backlog. Like there are 2 regional centres that I think have opened, is it right, this week? But that's been promised. They were supposed to be open a year ago. And so it's the access to help and support for families and children.
And this is exactly what...
to get into the talking therapies in order to help, in particular children who feel they, are gender dysmorphic.
Okay,
But
right.
can I be mildly
No,
controversial?
you
No,
can't.
all right.
No, you
I
can't.
didn't finish my
because-
sentence, if you don't mind me.
Your sentence.
Do you mind?
Paragraph.
Because we've only got a few minutes left, and I want to include another question, and it's a text question from Robert in Eastbourne. What does the panel think about Joe Biden saying he's considering dropping the charges against Julian Assange? Now, Australia's Parliament recently passed a measure which the country's Prime Minister Anthony Albanese backed to ask for Assange to be allowed to return to Australia, where he was born. He's currently in Belmarsh Prison while the High Court considers the US government's extradition request over the leaking of classified military documents. I suppose the first reaction, Jerry Hayes, you're the lawyer here, is what on earth has it got to do with Joe Biden saying he would drop charges?
Well, it's
I mean,
ridiculous. It
seems
should be the
odd.
Department of Justice. Because
Exactly.
There's a separation of powers. That's 100 Guinness, please.
Money talks.
But, I mean...
No, it's ridiculous.
Apart from that
Why?
point...
What's in it for Joe Biden doing this? I don't get it, because at the end of the day, the American right will go even madder than they are now and said, look, people were killed because of what was happening. Agents were, it wasn't a strategic, a surgical allowing of information to go out. It was just throwing everything. And people would have lost their lives as a result of that, and people would have been compromised. Tricky one.
But it also meant in certain countries, some of those information actually led to reforms. For example, Pakistan.
Oh, yeah, let people die for reforms. That's a
For
good
example,
idea,
Pakistan,
isn't it?
right? Pakistani former prime minister and the politicians whose money was found in Panama
Well, that's a shock, isn't it?
I know, but in millions. And without that report or without that leak, that would not have been a public
Thank
information.
heavens for Mr. Assange.
I think, like he said as a lawyer, I can't argue about that.
Yes, you can.
It's nothing to do with Joe Biden. I agree. But Julian Assange has been rotting in a hellhole for all this time. Where do we go from here? Does this guy stay in a hole for the rest of his life? Surely we need to go over and above what we see here and now. I know that what you've said. Right?
You're
What do you do?
painting
Either
him
you punish him.
You're painting him as an innocent.
Yes.
He's a bail jumper.
Yes.
That's why he's in Belmarsh.
Fair
Enough. Bail jumping in itself is a crime, but is that the crime for which he's being tried? He's being
Not the
tried
point.
for espionage, maybe, or leaking information that is classified.
Ian's
That's
got
his
it
crime,
right.
right?
That's what
Ian's
the
got it spot
that's
on.
what the US government is alleging.
So if that's the case, try him for that. But all of this palaver is coming at the back of the fact that we do have a moral decadence when it comes to our political elite. We see
that got
lots
to do with the political
It has got
elite?
everything to do with it. The fact that we find all this unethical information leaked to us, and we find out many leaders, doing all sorts of unethical things. Why do I have to find out from?
People died because of his leaks. They died. They
People
were
have
compromised.
died because of Clinton's bombing off countries,
That's not
invasion of
the
Iraq.
point.
I mean, that's not the point I'm making. I'm saying Julian Assange, what he has done, if he's tried for a crime, let him be tried.
In the early days of WikiLeaks, you're absolutely right. I think he performed a valuable service.
Yeah.
But to just release all of these papers unredacted onto the world,
Yes.
when he knew that there would be all sorts of people have their lives put at risk, I mean, I don't see how anyone can
I
defend
think we
that.
pushed him that way.
we
No,
pushed
hold on.
him. Oh,
We could have
please.
managed him well when he was doing such a good job.
come on.
We could have done it well by institutionalizing that particular work so that there are
His own
information
personal
coming
behaviour
out.
didn't help.
I was
James.
quite surprised by these comments because when the story first broke in 2010, Joe Biden was very critical. I think he said something like, I can't find the exact quote, but something like called Assange a cyber criminal. And now, 14 years later, what's really changed? Has he changed his views? Has the charges been changed? And so I was quite surprised by the timing, the decision, as you said, weird story. And
Very odd.
Is it just they've decided to drop it because they've proved their point to the rest of the
It's not for
world?
him. That's Ian's point. It's
Absolutely.
not for him.
I don't think it's a winning move for the presidential election.
Yeah,
is it?
Well,
He's not going to win. Never mind.
oh, so you want Trump?
I didn't say that.
I don't know. I mean, you might
like putting
do. You're
words
so all over the shop with your voting. You'll probably give it a try.
Trump is the one who banned me from going to America.
Why?
They took my passport away.
Why?
When I was about to board the plane because I'm a Muslim.
I remember
come
that.
on.
You remember that story?
No, that
Really?
Yeah.
happened. That
Well,
happened
because you're
many, many
Muslim.
times.
Yes.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So
Yeah.
as a lawyer, I would not have hired you because I don't think you'd have defended me well.
No, but I might have prosecuted.
You know,
Well, that's my point.
you'll like this one. Gordon says, this discussion is great. It's like being part of the best dinner party ever. Don't mention food in front of Ajmal. It's a sore point at the moment, but we'll come to that in a moment. Let's move to our fun question. It's from Rishi in Westminster, sort of.
Rishi.
No, it's not Sunak.
Well, it's inspired by this message from the aforementioned Rishi in Westminster to owners of white Adidas Samba trainers.
I just issue a fulsome apology to the Samba community. But in my defence, I would say I have been wearing Adidas trainers and Sambas and others, in fact, for many, many years. But I offer a fulsome apology to the Samba community.
What a cute little laugh he's got.
Oh, yes.
Never heard that before.
Which is the Samba
Anyway,
community?
the question is,
Yeah.
which item of clothing would you like to apologise to all other owners of for wearing?
Oh, no.
Go on.
Oh, don't start with me. Start with
just
me.
start
Well, I
with the
thought you had a ready-made answer.
No, I
there.
don't have a
Okay.
ready-made
Be here all night,
James?
but I've got at least 4 parliamentary Christmas jumpers, so I apologise for that. But I just add as well that Adidas stock price is down on today, so maybe the market's seen what Rishi said.
Oh, dear. It's a reverse
no.
Midas touch,
dear.
isn't it?
Dear.
Olly Grender. I mean, Lib Dems obviously sort of
What did they say on the
dedicated
doorstep?
followers of
What did they
fashion.
say on the doorstep?
Well, I do love that what has changed about doorstep. So this is not me apologising, but people are in their dressing gowns and PJs a lot more than they used to be halfway
As long
through
as
the
they're still
day.
in them.
Yeah. So I guess I'd apologise for sometimes being, in my PJ and dressing gowns at certain points of the day when, God forbid, somebody knocks on my door and bothers me about politics.
Ajmal.
My socks, I think. My congregation have spoken. They don't want me to wear bright socks anymore. They said to me the other day, the brightest socks wearing Imam they've ever seen. So maybe I just
You
change
should
my
tell them to mind their own business.
I do, but they see my feet because I do take our shoes off. It's quite
Oh,
visible.
that's true, isn't it?
When I'm
Yeah.
prostrating, my feet is very visible.
Yeah,
So,
I forgot
and
about
apparently it's
that.
a distraction. So I need to get rid of them and buy plain old black or white socks. But mine are very bright. I mean, look at that. This is
Yeah.
blue.
Oh, my gosh. What trainers are they?
Not
It's
Adidas.
the West Ham colours, aren't they?
Oh, they are.
Not Adidas. I can tell you that right now.
It's a good kind of social media handle, isn't it? Brightest socked Imam.
I do like Jon Snow's dress sense, bright tie and bright socks.
I was wearing those ties before
What happened?
he ever started.
What?
that can't be
I got
possible.
with a Cameron agenda. I know someone who has a bit of a sock fetish who was thinking of converting to Islam because of what you've just said.
Send them to my mosque. I'll be happy to.
He's a relationship counsellor.
Jerry.
He obviously believes in safe socks.
Oh dear.
You did expect Tolstoy this
Keep
time
the
of
day
night.
job.
The answer is I can't get into them now. Loon pants. Do you remember loon pants?
No.
Oh, God, no, you don't. You're quite young. In fact, I remember Iain Dale when he had hair and he was younger. Billy, of course, you're still pretty. But this was a long time ago.
Jerry is desperately flirting with you, Ian. I'm getting worried
But
today.
it's the History
Yeah.
Channel.
Do you remember that programme we did together with Anglia Television?
Oh, yes.
That sort of after dinner thing?
Yes.
That was good, wasn't it?
Yeah,
I think we should
really,
revive that.
We should do, actually. It was very,
Anyway,
very good.
enough of this malarkey, because I'm going to tell you that next week, on Monday's panel, we will have the former Conservative Foreign Office Minister, Sir Alan Duncan, with us.
Oh, yes.
What could possibly go wrong there?
Which party?
The Financial Times Whitehall editor, Lucy Fisher, and the writer and broadcaster, Matthew Said. So that's next Monday's Cross Question at 8. Thank you to all of you for coming in today. A very feisty and entertaining edition of Cross Question. One of you is staying with us. You can guess which one of the panel is staying with us when I tell you that over the next hour we're going to talk about Eid. What is
Eid?
it? What is it? And why do Muslims celebrate it? There are 4 million Muslims in this country who all tonight are celebrating Eid. Ajmal Masroor is going to tell us all about it, and we're going to ask, what does Eid mean to you? We know what Christmas means to Christians. We know about all sorts of other things, and we've all heard of Ramadan, we've all heard of Eid, but how many of us could actually sit here and say exactly what it all means? I'm ashamed to say that I probably couldn't, even though I have done this phone in before. So we want your calls, 0345 6060 973.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From